Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. My name is Jeremy. I'm 36, just an ordinary guy, neither strikingly handsome nor unattractive. I never put much stock in appearances, and I assumed my wife, Whitney, felt the same way. Or at least, that's what I had always believed. We had been married for 5 years, and life was stable. My career was on track, we had a comfortable amount of savings, owned a home, and had plenty of plans for the future. Everything seemed solid. Whitney, however, was someone people noticed. She was tall, effortlessly graceful, with piercing blue eyes and golden blonde hair. Whenever she walked into a room, heads inevitably turned. She never appeared to care about the attention, or so I thought. Then came the night that shifted everything. It was a relaxed birthday gathering, just friends drinking wine and indulging in the kind of late-night conversations that wander into strange territory. We were sitting in a circle, talking about aspirations, future plans, and eventually, kids. That's when Whitney said something that made my stomach drop. "If I ever had a child, I'd want them to have different genes," she remarked casually. For a brief moment, silence filled the room. My mind scrambled to make sense of her words. Did she actually mean that? Before I could respond, she let out a quick laugh and waved it off. "Oh, I didn't mean it like that," she said with a grin. "I was just joking. I mean, imagine if we had a kid with Scandinavian genes. Tall, blonde, blue-eyed. He'd probably look like a model, right?" A few nervous chuckles rippled through the group, everyone eager to move past the awkwardness. I forced a smile, trying to match the tone. "Sure," I said, attempting to sound amused. "Maybe we'll get some Viking strength in there too." The conversation drifted to other topics, but her words embedded themselves in my mind. At first, I brushed it off as an offhand comment, just something people say when they've had too much to drink. But as we lay in bed that night, her remark kept replaying in my head. Why would she say something like that? That moment was just the start. Initially, I convinced myself it was a one-time slip. But in the days that followed, I began noticing a pattern. Whitney's offhand comments about genetics and physical attributes started to pile up. We'd be watching a movie, and she'd randomly ask, "Do you think that actor's jawline is just genetics? Or does he work out obsessively?" Or she'd sigh and muse aloud, "Imagine having a kid with eyes like that." At first, I dismissed it. People admire celebrities all the time, right? But then she began making observations about random people in public. One afternoon at the grocery store, she leaned in close. "That guy must be at least 6 feet tall. Think he's Scandinavian? They're always tall." I let out a nervous chuckle. "What's with you and Scandinavians lately?" She smirked, but didn't answer. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself it was just a temporary fascination, like those phases where people get obsessed with fitness or binge-watch crime documentaries. But this was something else. Then one night over dinner, she escalated things. Twirling her pasta on her fork, she casually mentioned she'd been reading about genetics. Apparently, she had stumbled upon some blog or influencer discussing optimal gene combinations. I nearly choked on my food. "You're serious? Superior traits?" She nodded enthusiastically. "It's really interesting. There's actual research showing that certain features, height, symmetry, can impact a person's success. Tall men statistically earn more. People with symmetrical faces are perceived as more trustworthy." I frowned. "Okay, but why does that matter to us?" She sighed as if I were missing something obvious. "Jeremy, don't you want the best for our future children?" I struggled to respond. The way she spoke about it, so detached and analytical, unsettled me. I changed the subject, but an uncomfortable feeling lingered. In the weeks that followed, her interest became an obsession. She spent hours online, watching videos of so-called genetic experts and reading about inheritance patterns. She even started tracing her own ancestry, proudly pointing out her Scandinavian lineage. Then, one night, as we watched a movie, she dropped another bombshell. "I've been thinking, we should really consider how genetics will shape our kids." I grabbed the remote and muted the TV. "What do you mean?" She spoke as if discussing vacation plans. I mean, if we want to give our children every advantage, we should be strategic. I blinked. Strategic? You make it sound like we're designing a product. She crossed her arms, exasperated. Jeremy, this isn't about you. It's about setting our kids up for success. Strong genetics can do that. A tight knot formed in my stomach. Are you saying my genes aren't good enough? She hesitated, realizing how it sounded. No, I mean you're smart, responsible, even handsome. It's just what? I interrupted. You're worried our kids won't be tall enough? Won't have the right features? She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she studied me, carefully considering her words. And that's when it truly hit me. This wasn't a passing phase. She wasn't going to move on from this after a few blog posts or viral TikTok videos. She was serious. That night, I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. How do you reason with someone who believes your future children need to be engineered for perfection? The following weeks were agonizing. Her casual comments turned into outright fixation. Every outing became an opportunity for her to analyze strangers. One afternoon, as we walked through the park, she pointed at a tall blonde couple pushing a stroller. Look at them, she murmured. Their kids will probably be athletes or CEOs. I rolled my eyes. Right, because genetics guarantees success. She ignored my sarcasm, watching them like they were part of some grand experiment. But it wasn't just her words. Her entire demeanor changed. She became distant, colder. The woman who once curled up next to me on the couch now barely acknowledged my presence. And when she did, it was often with subtle digs. One evening, we had a minor argument over dinner plans. Frustrated, she snapped, "Maybe if you weren't so average, you'd understand how important this is." I froze. Excuse me? Average? That's how you see me now? Her expression shifted as if she regretted saying it. Jeremy, I didn't mean... But she had, and there was no taking it back. You know exactly what I'm getting at. No, actually I don't, I snapped, frustration seeping into my voice. Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're regretting marrying a man who isn't some towering, broad-shouldered warrior. She exhaled sharply, crossing her arms as if bracing herself. I'm worried. Worried about what? That our kids won't have the same advantages as others, she admitted, her voice tight with unease. The world is already tough enough. I scoffed, shaking my head. That's absurd, Whitney. Our children will be loved, supported, and given every opportunity to succeed. But she wasn't ready to let go of this misguided belief, clinging to it like it was an undeniable truth. Silence settled between us, thick and suffocating. I could see it in her face. She wasn't going to back down. And me? I was caught between the urge to shake some sense into her and the impulse to just walk away. From that moment, everything began to unravel. Whitney pulled away, withdrawing emotionally, as if she had already decided I was genetically unfit. She bombarded me with statistics. Taller men earn more. Symmetrical features inspire trust. It was relentless, exhausting, and utterly dehumanizing. One night I couldn't hold back any longer. So let me get this straight. You think I'm not suitable to father your children because I don't meet some arbitrary genetic checklist? If that's how you feel, why the hell did you marry me, Whitney? She hesitated, her expression softening just slightly. Jeremy, that's not what I'm saying. Then what are you saying? My voice was low, restrained, but the anger simmered beneath the surface. You're a good man. You're dependable, and I love you, she said carefully. But this isn't just about us. It's about the future. A hollow laugh escaped me. So I'm good enough to be your husband, but not good enough to be the father of your children. Got it. The betrayal hit deep. That night, I didn't even bother climbing into bed. Instead, I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how we got here. This wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with. The woman I married didn't care about superficial nonsense like this. Now, she felt like a stranger. And for the first time, I had to ask myself, was this the beginning of the end? Her obsession only deepened. She spoke about genetic advantages as casually as discussing weekend plans, as if she hadn't already gutted me with the notion that I wasn't enough. Then, one night, she crossed a line I never saw coming. We were sitting in the living room, barely acknowledging each other. I flipped through channels, trying to avoid another argument when she spoke up. Jeremy, I've been thinking. Dread curled in my stomach. Oh, this should be good. I muted the TV and turned to face her. Thinking about what? She hesitated before dropping the bombshell. Maybe we should consider a sperm donor, someone with stronger traits. For a moment, I was sure I had misheard. What the hell did you just say? Don't get upset, she rushed to say, already on the defensive. I'm just saying we should explore all options. Blood roared in my ears as I shot up from the couch, pacing the room. Options? You mean replacing my DNA with another man's? Do you even hear yourself? Jeremy, please, calm down, she pleaded, as if I was the one being irrational. It's not like I'm suggesting I sleep with someone else. It's just a medical procedure. A bitter laugh escaped me. Oh well, that makes everything so much better. Thanks for the clarification, Whitney. Now I totally feel secure knowing you'd rather create a designer baby than have one with me. She folded her arms, her frustration evident. You're twisting my words. You refuse to see my point. No, I see it perfectly, I shot back, my voice laced with bitterness. You've made it clear that I'm not good enough, that our children need an upgrade because the thought of them resembling me is unbearable to you. She rolled her eyes. You're being dramatic. I let out another humorless laugh. Dramatic? You've spent months obsessing over this, throwing statistics at me, making comparisons, and now you're actually suggesting a sperm donor. If anyone is being dramatic, it's you. She stood, meeting my gaze. I'm not trying to hurt you, Jeremy. I just want what's best for our children. Why can't you understand that? Because you've lost touch with reality, I shouted. You've let this obsession warp your mind, and you don't even see the damage you're causing. Do you even care how this makes me feel? For a second, I thought I saw realization flicker across her face, but it was too late. The damage was done. I couldn't unhear her words. I needed space. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, leaving her standing alone in the living room. I drove for hours, my thoughts circling a single truth. This wasn't just a fight. This was a breaking point, and I wasn't sure if we could ever come back from it. When I finally returned, Whitney was waiting, exhaustion evident in her face. Are you planning to stay out all night from now on? She asked quietly. I didn't hesitate. I'm considering it. I brushed past her, heading straight for the spare bedroom. I was done. Done with the statistics, the cold detachment, the feeling of never being enough. The following days were unbearable. We barely spoke. I knew she was confused, maybe even hurt, but I no longer cared. I replayed our conversation over and over, the wound refusing to close. She didn't seem to grasp how deep she had cut me. To her, this was another disagreement, something we could resolve. But to me, this was the edge of a cliff. I had already fallen, and there was no way back. Then, one evening, she brought it up again. We sat at the dining table, the silence suffocating. She set down her fork and spoke cautiously. Jeremy, I think we need to be realistic. I looked at her. Realistic about what? She exhaled, rubbing her temples. About children. About how we move forward. I know you hate the idea of sperm donation, so I've been researching other alternatives. My stomach tightened. What kind of alternatives? Calm down, she said quickly. I'm just speaking hypothetically. Some couples use surrogates. Others consider non-traditional methods. My pulse hammered. Non-traditional? Are you saying? She cut me off, shaking her head. No, I'm not talking about cheating. I just mean there are options. We should at least have a conversation. I stared at her, my heart pounding. She truly believed this was something to discuss. But I already knew the truth. There was nothing left to save. Whitney, do you even hear yourself right now? You're actually sitting here, suggesting we bring in someone else to have a child. Have you completely lost it? The absurdity of her words hit me so hard I could barely register them. She hesitated, as if only just realizing how ridiculous she sounded, then forced a nervous laugh, waving her hand as if that could somehow undo what she had just said. You're blowing this out of proportion. It was just an idea. Just an idea. I shoved my chair back and stood, my glare drilling into her. You expect me to sit here and calmly listen while you brainstorm ways to replace me as the father of our children? Jeremy, don't be like this. I'm done, Whitney. Her eyes widened, the shock evident on her face. You don't mean that. I do. My voice was firm, even as my chest tightened. I've been done for a while now. You've pushed me to my limit with this whole genetic fantasy. I don't even recognize you anymore. Jeremy, please. She got up, reaching for me. You can't just walk away over a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding. My voice was razor sharp. For months, you've chipped away at me, made me feel inadequate, like I'm just some placeholder while you fantasize about an ideal version of our future kids. And now you want to talk about alternatives? No, I refuse to be part of this experiment. You're being selfish, she snapped, her tone hardening. You're making this about your ego instead of thinking about our future family. I let out a bitter laugh. That's rich, coming from someone who wants to custom order a child like it's a designer handbag. Her expression turned to stone. You're impossible, and you're delusional. My words were ice. Enjoy your dream life, Whitney, because it won't include me. That night, I packed my bags. As I stepped outside, she followed, her voice trembling. Jeremy, wait. You don't have to do this. We can talk. I didn't even look back. I'm done talking. Your obsession with a fantasy has ruined what we had. Newsflash. Perfect families don't exist. You destroyed us chasing something that never will. I got in my car and drove off. I had no destination in mind, just the overwhelming need to be anywhere but there. Hours passed before my phone rang. I let it buzz a few times before finally answering. What do you want? My tone was flat. Where are you? She asked softly. Are you coming home? No, Whitney. I'm not coming home. The finality in my voice was absolute. I need space. I need time. And honestly, so do you. Jeremy, I don't get why you're so upset. I thought we were having a rational discussion. I exhaled sharply, exhaustion settling deep in my bones. Jesus, Whitney, you really don't get it. You've spent months making me feel inadequate, measuring me against some fantasy. How can you not see how damaging that is? Silence filled the line. Then, in a whisper, she said, I never meant to hurt you. Well, you did. My voice was cold. And I'm done arguing. We're not even in the same reality anymore. That was the last real conversation we ever had. The next day, I called a lawyer. Whitney barely resisted. Maybe she was still in shock, or maybe she had convinced herself that I was the one being irrational. Either way, the divorce moved fast, almost too fast. She didn't drag it out, didn't contest anything. It was like she couldn't fully comprehend that it was actually happening. Meanwhile, I was laser-focused, meeting with my lawyer, setting up my own bank account, searching for a new place. She reached out a few times, but every conversation felt strained, meaningless. The last time she called, she said, Jeremy, I think you're overreacting. Maybe you're just stressed. We can fix this. I nearly laughed. Whitney, I'm not stressed. I'm done. You made it painfully clear I don't fit into your vision anymore, and I can't stay with someone who sees me as a genetic flaw. She didn't respond. No argument, no apology, just silence. The divorce was finalized without spectacle. Word got around, and soon the questions started coming. Friends, family, everyone wanted to know what had happened. But I wasn't about to expose Whitney's obsession with designer genetics. That was her burden to bear. From what I heard, she didn't handle the fallout well. At a party, some guy joked, "Guess now you're free to find that Viking you wanted." She didn't take it well. Good. Maybe she finally had to confront reality. Life after divorce was strange. When someone has been part of your life for so long, their sudden absence is deafening. I moved into a small apartment, temporary, just until I figured things out. I stayed busy, hiking, working out, spending time with friends who didn't bring up her name. Dating wasn't even a consideration. First, I had to rebuild myself. But the nights were tough. Lying in bed at 2 a.m., I'd replay our arguments, all the insane conversations. I'd ask myself if I could have handled it differently, if maybe I had overreacted. Deep down, I already knew the answer. Whitney wasn't the woman I had married. She had let this toxic obsession consume her, and nothing I did could have changed that. As for her, I heard she wasn't doing great. She buried herself in work, kept her distance from friends. The social butterfly had clipped her own wings. She tried reaching out a few more times, sending messages like, "Can we talk?" And I've been thinking about everything. I never responded. I wasn't going back. I wasn't reopening wounds that had finally begun to heal. I often wondered if she ever truly understood the damage she had done. But that was no longer my problem. I was moving forward, one step at a time. And honestly, I felt lighter, free, no more impossible expectations, no more competing with an illusion, just me, and that was more than enough. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. 3 days prior to the company event, Sophia gave me an unusual look paired with a curious smile. "You don't have to come to this one," she said, her tone light but firm. At the moment, her comment seemed inconsequential, barely registering in my mind. Only later did I realize it carried a weight I hadn't grasped. My name is Ethan Bennett, and at 48 years old, I believed my life was secure, complete. I'm a seasoned account manager working for a prominent manufacturing company. For years, I considered myself a man who had everything: a fulfilling career, a beautiful family, and a wife I adored. Sophia and I had been married for 25 years. She wasn't just my spouse, she was my first love, my best friend since elementary school. Our life together was, by most standards, enviable. We shared a gorgeous home overlooking Lake Arlington, raised a wonderful daughter, and enjoyed a level of financial comfort many only dream of. Sophia, a graphic designer for a renowned advertising agency, had an effortless charm. With her golden hair, striking blue eyes, and a figure that defied time, she seemed to captivate everyone around her. I'd always taken pride in being the man by her side, proud of our history, our connection, and the life we had built together. We grew up as neighbors in Fort Worth, practically inseparable from the time we were teenagers. By senior prom, we were a couple everyone assumed would go the distance. College brought us closer still. We both attended the University of Texas, sharing a tiny apartment and scraping by as broke students. Those years were challenging but golden, solidifying a bond that felt unbreakable. We often laughed about how we'd mastered the art of living together before we even exchanged vows. Shortly after graduation, we married, and within a few years, we welcomed Maria, our only child, into the world. Now 21, Maria is pursuing her studies at the University of Oklahoma and is engaged to William, a responsible young man from a well-off family. He adores her, and we couldn't have wished for a better match. From the outside, our family seemed picture perfect. Financially, we were thriving. Sophia's success in graphic design earned her an impressive salary, while my own career brought in close to $500,000 annually. 15 years ago, we bought a foreclosed lakefront property outright and turned it into our dream home. Today, that property's value exceeds $2 million. With a robust retirement fund and no financial worries, life appeared to be everything we'd hoped for. Yet, it was precisely this stability that made what happened next so devastating. For years, Sophia and I had a steady rhythm to our relationship: shared breakfasts, evening conversations about our day, and occasional date nights. While predictable, it felt reliable. She'd talk about her design projects and colleagues, while I'd share the triumphs and challenges of managing large accounts. In hindsight, there were subtle cracks in our foundation, moments when Sophia seemed preoccupied or uncharacteristically quiet about work. I dismissed them as stress, trusting in the strength of our 25 years together. She wasn't just my wife, she was my partner in every sense of the word. That's why her insistence that I skip the company party didn't immediately raise alarms. "It's not a big deal," she said, her smile disarming. But as the event drew closer, an uneasy feeling settled over me. Why didn't she want me there? What was I missing? By the night of the party, my curiosity had grown too strong to ignore. I decided to go. When Sophia stepped out of our room, she looked stunning. Her black dress accentuated her flawless figure. Her blonde hair flowed in elegant waves, and her bright blue eyes sparkled with an intensity that seemed almost calculated. At the venue, I quickly noticed how adored she was by her colleagues. Sophia had always been the outgoing one, but the way people flocked to her that evening felt different. Their lingering glances and warm smiles carried an undertone I couldn't quite define. Then, I saw him. A man in his early 50s with sharp features and a confident demeanor approached Sophia. His presence immediately set me on edge. She greeted him warmly, her handshake lingering in a way that felt too personal. "This is Steven Trexler," she introduced him, her voice carrying a hint of familiarity that struck me. He was one of her advertising sales reps. Something about him seemed off. His charm felt overly practiced, his laugh too polished. Most unsettling was the way he looked at Sophia, with an intensity that was anything but professional. Throughout the night, my unease grew. I caught Sophia's eyes darting toward Steven when she thought I wasn't looking. They stood closer than necessary during conversations, their casual touches lasting just a second too long. On the dance floor, her attention wandered. Normally, Sophia loved dancing with me, but that night, her focus was elsewhere. Steven, standing on the edge of the crowd, watched us with a smug expression that made my blood boil. The breaking point came when Steven approached our table. Ignoring me completely, he asked Sophia to dance. My anger flared, but before I could say a word, Sophia declined with a sweet smile. "All my dances are reserved for my husband," she said, her words briefly soothing my worries. Yet, the flicker of annoyance in Steven's eyes told me this wasn't over. Later, as Sophia headed to the bar, I observed from a distance. Steven joined her. Their conversation was quiet but intense, their body language charged. I saw Sophia's lips move, catching just enough to decipher her words. "I'm sorry, darling." The term hit me like a gut punch. Darling? Who was this man to her? The rest of the night blurred as my mind spiraled. The way others glanced at me confirmed my growing suspicion. I was the only one blind to the truth. At home, I confronted her. "What's going on between you and Steven?" I asked, keeping my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Sophia dismissed it, her tone calm, her explanation rehearsed. "You're being paranoid," she said. But as she pretended to sleep beside me that night, I knew I couldn't trust her words alone. I needed proof. The next morning, I hired David Carter, a private investigator known for his discretion. I laid out everything I'd observed and asked him to uncover the truth. Within a week, David delivered his findings. The photos he handed me were like a blow to the chest. There was Sophia, walking into a motel with Steven, their body language casual and familiar. Another image showed them kissing in the parking lot, oblivious to anyone who might see. My world crumbled as I stared at the evidence. I asked David to gather more, needing the full picture before I confronted her. But with each passing day, the weight of what I knew became unbearable. Everything I thought I understood about my life and my marriage was now in question, leaving me to face a painful and uncertain reality. In the ensuing weeks, the case against her became undeniable. Photographs surfaced, followed by videos and even audio recordings. The situation was far more dire than I had imagined. This wasn't a brief indiscretion or a few stolen moments. It was a full-blown affair. The evidence included recordings where Sophia openly joked about their office spouse arrangement. She spoke of how easy it was to keep their secret hidden, laughing as if it were some harmless game. The most painful part came when she mentioned me by name, her tone light and dismissive. "Ethan will never suspect a thing," she said almost mockingly. "He's too wrapped up in work to notice." Hearing those words cut me deeper than I thought possible. She had misjudged me, pegging me as an oblivious and unsuspecting fool. When David handed me the final dossier, I couldn't even muster the strength to leave the parking lot. I sat in my car, combing through the damning evidence, pictures, transcripts, and hours of recordings that left no room for doubt. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a single mistake. Sophia had been living a double life, and I was the last to uncover the truth. Friends, colleagues, they had all known. Everyone but me. That evening, I returned home, masking my turmoil behind a facade of normalcy. Sophia greeted me with her usual warmth, inquiring about my day as if her life wasn't built on lies. I watched her closely, every word and gesture a cruel reminder of her betrayal. The next morning, I resolved to end the pretense. As we sat down for breakfast, I placed an envelope stuffed with evidence on the table. "Sophia," I began, keeping my voice unnervingly calm. "You'd never betray me, would you?" She froze mid-bite, her expression carefully neutral. "Of course not," she replied defensively. "Why would you even ask that?" Without a word, I slid the first photo toward her. Her face turned ashen. One by one, I handed her more photos, each piece of evidence eroding her composure. "Ethan, it's not what it seems," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It's meaningless, purely physical. It doesn't matter." Leaning forward, I met her gaze, my tone colder than I'd ever heard it. "It matters to me." Her excuses poured forth, how it was just a fling, how she never stopped loving me, how she never thought I'd find out. But her words were hollow. The evidence was irrefutable, and there was no undoing what had been done. Sitting there, looking at the woman I'd cherished for 25 years, I felt something inside me snap. Trust, once broken, was irreparable. If discovering her betrayal was shattering, the aftermath was far worse. The atmosphere at home became suffocating. Sophia's tearful apologies only stoked the fire of my anger. She reduced her year-long affair to a mistake, as if that could somehow excuse the depth of her deception. To clear my head, I immersed myself in work for a few days. That's when Maria, my daughter, called. Maria was my beacon, a source of joy in an otherwise dark time. Seeing her name on my phone offered a brief glimmer of relief. "Hey, sweetheart," I answered, forcing a calm tone. Her voice, hesitant and unsure, immediately set me on edge. "Dad, I just spoke to Mom. She said you kicked her out of the house. What's going on?" My stomach sank. I hadn't told Sophia to leave, yet, but clearly, she had already begun spinning her narrative. Taking a deep breath, I explained everything. The affair, the lies, and how it had gone on for over a year. Maria's response stunned me. "Dad, it's not that big of a deal." I was sure I'd misheard her. "Not a big deal?" I repeated, disbelief flooding my voice. "Maria, your mother betrayed me. She lied for an entire year." She sighed, as though I were the one being unreasonable. "Dad, it's the modern era. Affairs happen. Men do it all the time and nobody makes a big deal about it." Anger surged through me. "I never did that to your mother," I snapped. "Not once." Her tone shifted, becoming cold and dismissive. "Maybe you should have. Maybe then you wouldn't be so upset now. Dad, let it go. Mom loves you. Let her come home." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My daughter was siding with her mother, treating me like the villain for daring to be hurt. But it didn't end there. "Oh, by the way," Maria added casually, "I know Stephen. He's a great guy. Mom and I think he should come to the wedding." I gripped the phone tightly. "What?" My voice was barely controlled. "He's important to Mom," she said, as if that explained everything. "Honestly, I like him too. If Mom wants him there, he should be. Maybe he could even walk her down the aisle with you." That was the breaking point. "Maria, if Stephen is at your wedding," I said icily, "then I won't be." A long silence followed. "Dad, you're being ridiculous," she finally said. "No," I replied firmly. "If you want Stephen there, let him play the role of father of the bride, because I won't." I ended the call, my hands trembling. The daughter I had adored was defending her mother and the man who had destroyed our family. Later that evening, Sophia approached me again, her face streaked with tears. She begged for another chance, claiming she wanted to make things right. But then she delivered her final blow. "Ethan, I want to fix this," she said, her voice quivering. "But I also want to keep seeing Stephen. You have to accept that." I stared at her, numb. "Sophia," I said quietly, "you need to leave." Though she didn't leave immediately, something inside me fractured irreparably. The woman I loved and the daughter I cherished no longer resembled the people I thought they were. For the first time in my life, I truly felt alone. But if they thought I would crumble, they were wrong. I poured my pain into strategy. Years of financial planning had taught me to be meticulous, and now I used those skills to ensure I wouldn't be left empty-handed. I began moving funds to an offshore account under a name she couldn't trace. I refinanced the house, drawing out a substantial loan. Sophia, who had always taken pride in our home, never paid attention to the finer details. Finally, I borrowed against her prized luxury car. She had no idea what was coming. This time, I would be the one in control. The property was appraised at nearly $45,000, and I successfully secured a $4,000 loan using it as collateral. Every single dollar went into accounts that were beyond her reach. The debt? It was entirely in her name. For weeks, I worked quietly, dedicating every spare moment to perfecting my strategy. Outwardly, I acted as though I was moving past the betrayal. I suggested to Sophia that we try to mend our relationship. She seemed relieved, even smug, as if she believed she had won. Little did she know, each night she spent at Stephen's motel brought me closer to implementing my plan. At work, the timing couldn't have been more opportune. The company was in the midst of a merger, and they extended a buyout offer worth over $500,000. Without hesitation, I accepted and ensured the funds were wired directly to an offshore account. The next step was canceling the wedding plans. Maria's fantasy wedding? I called the planner and informed her that no further payments would be made. Instead, I suggested Maria seek financial help from her so-called office dad. The planner was stunned, but I was unmoved. If Maria chose to align herself with Sophia and Stephen, she could deal with the consequences. The final piece of the puzzle involved obtaining Sophia's signature on some documents without her realizing their true nature. I fabricated life insurance policies and presented them as part of a new company benefit. One evening, after she'd had a couple of glasses of wine, I handed her the papers, casually mentioning they needed to be notarized. In her slightly inebriated state, she signed without a second thought. That signature was the key to everything. It took a couple of months to bring all the pieces together, but when everything was in place, I was ready to disappear. The house, the car, the debts, all of it was now Sophia's problem. By the time the bank came knocking, I would be long gone. The most challenging part was maintaining the facade. Each morning, I'd sit across from Sophia at breakfast, listening to her talk about our future. Every word she spoke was a painful reminder of how far she had fallen from the person I once loved. But I kept my composure, nodding and smiling, while silently counting down the days. On the final day, I returned my company badge, packed my belongings, and walked out the door without looking back. By the time Sophia realized what had happened, I'd already become a distant memory. She thought she had outsmarted me, but she had no idea I had been 10 steps ahead the entire time. Walking away felt like stepping out of a stifling room into the open air. I was free, even though I knew the fallout for Sophia and the others was only just beginning. The cracks in her world appeared about a week after my departure. The loan against the house was finalized, and the bank wasted no time contacting Sophia. She was utterly blindsided. For years, she had assumed the house was fully paid off. Now she was saddled with a $2,000 debt she had no way to manage. The BMW? The same story. Without my income, the payments became unmanageable. I imagine she turned to Stephen for support, but he had his own chaos to navigate. Thanks to me, his wife discovered the affair and immediately filed for divorce. She took their home, most of their assets, and even orchestrated his firing from their advertising agency. She was, after all, a major shareholder. Stephen's high-flying career as a sales executive crumbled, leaving him driving an old car for a rideshare company. Maria's dreams of a fairy tale ending were also dashed. After cutting off the wedding funds, I contacted William, her fiancé, and laid everything bare. I even provided recordings of Maria dismissing the affair as inconsequential. Devastated, William called off the engagement, leaving Maria to deal with the consequences. With no wealthy partner to rely on and a father who refused to step in, Maria moved in with Sophia. The two of them ended up sharing a cramped two-bedroom apartment in a rundown neighborhood. The place, from what I heard, was barely livable, but it was all they could afford after Sophia lost both the house and her car. I could have stopped there, but I wanted Sophia to fully understand the weight of her actions. I provided evidence of the affair to both Stephen's wife and Sophia's employer. Her professional reputation was shattered, and eventually, she lost her job. Last I heard, she was working as a waitress at a roadside diner. As for me, I started a new chapter in Florida. The warm weather, a fresh start, and a life free from entanglements suited me perfectly. I bought a truck and a travel trailer, paid in full, and registered under my cousin's name. My finances were secure in offshore accounts, and I found a fantastic position at a large company. Occasionally, I'd hear snippets about Sophia, Maria, and Stephen, all struggling to make ends meet, but it didn't faze me. I felt no remorse for them. They had made their choices, and now they were living with the consequences. My life, on the other hand, exceeded every expectation. Each day I woke up with a clear mind, free from lies and turmoil. The sun seemed brighter, and the future felt limitless. Losing my wife and family had been painful, but in their absence, I had discovered something far more valuable: freedom. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.